If I'd known how things would spiral out of control, I would have walked away that night. But at the time, it was just a charity gala, another night of small talk, business cards, and expensive champagne. I was there to keep up appearances, make a few connections, and then slip back to my predictable, orderly life. That's when I saw her. She was standing by the bar, talking to a group of people, but her gaze kept drifting away, scanning the crowd. Dark hair, red lipstick, a simple black dress that hinted at her figure in a way that was both understated and impossible to ignore. The kind of woman who could hold the attention of any room, and she knew it. When her eyes met mine, she held my gaze just long enough to make me forget whatever bland conversation I'd been pretending to listen to. I don't remember exactly how I ended up standing beside her, only that the usual noise of the crowd faded into the background as we started talking. Her name was Vivian, and she had this quiet confidence, this magnetic charm that made it feel like we were sharing some private secret, even though we'd only just met. We talked about everything and nothing, the art on the walls, the ridiculousness of the event, her favorite cocktail. I barely noticed the time passing. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. Felt impulsive, even reckless. But I told myself it was harmless. Just a little excitement, a new friend. But as I left the gala, my pulse was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into something I didn't fully understand. Over the next few weeks, we slipped into a routine of secret texts and quiet rendezvous. First, it was just drinks after work, brief encounters where we'd sit close enough to feel the thrill of something forbidden. But before long, the nights grew longer, the meetings more intense, and our conversations drifted from polite, small talk to something that felt dangerously close to intimacy. Vivian was different from anyone I'd met. She was witty, confident, and utterly unpredictable. She rarely talked about her personal life, and I didn't ask. I didn't tell her about my relationship back home either. There was an unspoken agreement between us to keep things in the moment, to live in the here and now without the weight of reality creeping in. Each time we met, I found myself more captivated, drawn into her world. I told myself it was just a distraction, something to break up the monotony of my life. But I knew, deep down, that it was more than that. She was starting to matter to me in a way that felt dangerous. And then came the day that changed everything. Our meetings started off simple, but soon Vivian and I were tangled in something that felt like a different world. Each time we met, it was as if the rest of my life didn't exist. It was just us, stepping into some hidden electric reality where there were no rules. One Friday night, we met at an upscale bar tucked away in a quiet part of Manhattan. The kind of place with dim lighting and leather booths, where conversations disappeared into shadows. She was already there when I arrived, seated in a corner booth, her dark hair falling over one shoulder, that confident smile playing on her lips as she saw me. "Well, look who finally made it," she teased as I slid into the seat across from her. "Someone has to pay the bills," I said, smirking. If I remember correctly, I was the one who had to sneak out of a meeting early to get here. She shrugged, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. "I like a man who knows his priorities." We ordered drinks, and as the night went on, the conversation drifted from light banter to something more personal. She had this way of making me open up, asking questions with just enough curiosity to keep me talking, but never enough to feel like an interrogation. "So," she said, swirling her glass, "tell me something real, something no one else knows. About you." I leaned back, raising an eyebrow. "Is that your idea of small talk?" She laughed, that low, melodic sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Come on, Alex. I know there's more to you than suits and courtrooms." I hesitated. "All right," I said, leaning in. "When I was 12, I thought I'd become a professional guitarist. Played every day. Had posters of rock legends all over my bedroom walls." Vivian's eyes sparkled with surprise. "I never would have pegged you for a rock star." "Trust me, it didn't last," I said, chuckling. "Turns out I was terrible at it." But it was nice to dream. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that caught me off guard. We all need something to dream about. There was a pause, and for a moment, the air between us felt heavier. I reached across the table, letting my hand rest on hers. What about you? Any dreams you're hiding? Her expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of something guarded, like she was calculating. Her answer, maybe, she said finally, pulling her hand back with a coy smile. But some secrets are worth keeping. We finished our drinks, and I followed her out of the bar into the cool night air. She looked up at me, her face lit by the glow of the street lamps, and I felt a magnetic pull, something I couldn't resist even if I'd wanted to. I leaned down and she met me halfway, her lips warm and soft, her hands slipping around my neck as she pulled me closer. By the time we parted, I knew I was in over my head, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the next time I'd see her. A few days later, life snapped back into focus. It was a Monday morning, and I was sitting at my desk, halfway through my second coffee, when my secretary buzzed in to tell me my new client had arrived. I straightened my tie, ran a hand over my hair, and prepared myself for what I thought would be a typical consultation. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately, Ethan Prescott, a high-profile investor, someone whose name showed up in business columns and who was rumored to be worth more than most people could even imagine. His reputation preceded him. Ruthless, efficient, a man who didn't take no for an answer. "Mr. Prescott," I said, standing to shake his hand. "It's a pleasure. Please have a seat." He sat down across from me, a man who looked every bit as polished and controlled as the articles described him. His suit was tailored, his expression unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture, a tightness that suggested something more than business. "I'll be blunt, Mr. Blake," he began, his voice low and steady. "I'm here because I suspect my wife is involved with someone else. I can't say I have concrete proof, but I know her, and I know when something's wrong." The words made my stomach twist, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, professional and calm. "How can I help you with this situation?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "I want a divorce, but I want to protect my assets. And I need proof of her affair to ensure she doesn't walk away with half of everything I've built. That's why I need someone I can trust to handle this discreetly." I nodded, mentally bracing myself. This was familiar territory. High-stakes divorces were my bread and butter. But something about the way he spoke of his wife made me uneasy, like there was a storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Of course," I said smoothly, "discretion is my specialty. We'll handle this carefully and make sure your interests are protected." Ethan paused, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. "This is her. In case you need to familiarize yourself." He placed the photo on my desk, and my heart stopped. Staring back at me from the glossy print was Vivian, smiling, elegant, every bit as magnetic as she'd been the night we'd met. Only now, she wasn't the mysterious stranger who'd captivated me in a bar. She was Ethan Prescott's wife. I felt my grip on the desk tighten, my mind racing to process what this meant. Somehow I managed to keep my face blank, sliding the photo back to him with a nod. "Understood," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "I'll begin preparations immediately." He gave me a curt nod and stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Blake. I'll be expecting results soon." As he left, I stared at the closed door, the reality of my situation settling over me like a vice. I'd walked into a trap of my own making, and now the woman I'd fallen for was the wife of the man who'd just hired me to expose her secrets. I was in too deep, and there was no way out. After Ethan left my office, I sat frozen at my desk, staring at the spot where he'd placed her photo. I kept seeing her face, her warm smile, the way her eyes held that glint of mystery that had pulled me in from the start. Except now, all I could see was the web of lies closing around me, I'd fallen for my client's wife, and he'd hired me to catch her in the very affair that we were both part of. I told myself to breathe, to calm down, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. This could ruin me. My career, my reputation, everything I'd built as a top divorce attorney in New York could be shattered if Ethan ever found out the truth. And if he did, I'd be handing him all the evidence he'd need to bury me. There was a knock on my office door, snapping me back to reality. It was my assistant, Sarah, holding a file. "You okay?" she asked, a concerned look on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, hiding the storm brewing inside. "Just a long day," I said, taking the file from her. "Thanks, Sarah. That'll be all for now." She nodded, casting me one last curious look before heading out and closing the door behind her. I waited until I was alone again before letting out a shaky breath. I needed to figure out what to do, but the first step was clear. I had to talk to Vivian. I had to understand how much of this she'd known, and if there was any way out. We met later that evening in a small, dimly lit cafe on the Lower East Side, far enough from the places we usually went together. I arrived first, my mind still a tangle of anger, confusion, and fear. I was desperate for answers, but part of me was terrified to hear them. She walked in a few minutes later, looking as composed as ever, wearing a long coat that brushed her knees and a scarf that framed her face. For a moment, seeing her, I felt that same pull, that same thrill that had captivated me from the start. But now it was tainted, laced with suspicion and dread. As she slid into the booth across from me, her expression softened. "Alex, you look tense. Is everything all right?" I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Vivian, we need to talk. About your husband." Her face went pale, but her expression didn't change. She kept her gaze on me, calm and composed even as the words sank in. "Ethan?" "Yes, Ethan. He came to my office today. He's hired me to help him with his divorce. He suspects you of having an affair." I kept my tone low, barely more than a whisper, but the weight of the accusation hung heavy between us. Vivian's eyes dropped to the table, and she let out a long sigh. "I didn't think he'd go this far," she murmured. I knew things were bad between us, but I watched her carefully, trying to read her expression. "Did you know he was coming to see me?" She shook her head. "No, but I can't say I'm surprised. He's a man who hates losing. To him, marriage is a business deal, one he can't let go of easily." "But you're here," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "With me. How do I fit into this?" Vivian looked up, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw vulnerability in her eyes. "Alex, you have to believe me. I didn't know who you were. When we met, it felt like something I couldn't control. I was drawn to you. I didn't plan this." "Didn't plan it?" I repeated, anger bubbling up despite my efforts to stay calm. "You didn't think it was important to tell me you were married?" Her face tightened, a flash of something defensive in her expression. "Would it have mattered? You never asked about my life. You were more than happy to keep things mysterious, just as I was, because I thought it was harmless." I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "I didn't think I was getting involved in a mess that could cost me my career. You have no idea what kind of risk I'm taking here, Vivian." She looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, Alex. I didn't mean to put you in this position. I was looking for an escape. And with you, I felt free, like I was finally living my life on my own terms." The vulnerability in her voice disarmed me, chipping away at my anger, even though I wanted to stay furious. I looked at her, the woman I'd been so captivated by, and for the first time, I wondered if there was more beneath the surface than I'd seen. If maybe she was as trapped as I was. "Why don't you just leave him?" I asked finally, my voice quieter. "If things are that bad, why stay?" She hesitated, glancing away. It's complicated. Ethan and I, it was never a love story. More of a partnership. He has power, influence, and I have my own ambitions. Leaving him would mean walking away from everything I've built. She looked back at me, a hint of desperation in her eyes. But with you, Alex, I thought maybe I could have something real. Something honest. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I knew I couldn't let myself get pulled further into her web. Vivian, whatever this is between us, it's a lie. Your husband is my client now. If he finds out. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine, and I felt that familiar spark, the one that had drawn me in from the beginning. He won't find out, Alex. We can be careful. We can figure this out together. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized I wasn't sure if I could trust her. She'd lied to me from the start, kept me in the dark about who she really was, what her life really entailed. And now, I was supposed to believe that she'd meant every word, that this wasn't just another game to her. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. I don't know, Vivian. I don't know if I can do this. She looked wounded, her confidence faltering. Please, Alex, I need you. You're the only real thing I have left. Her words hung in the air, tugging at my emotions. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the idea that we could somehow make this work. But another part of me, the part that knew the risks, knew that this was heading for disaster. I need time to think, I said finally, standing up. This whatever we're doing, it's too dangerous. I need to figure out if it's worth the risk. She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with a sadness that seemed almost genuine. I understand. But please, don't give up on us yet. As I walked out of the cafe and into the night, her words echoed in my mind, mingling with the fear and confusion that had taken over my life. I was in too deep, and every instinct told me to walk away. But as much as I wanted to, I wasn't sure I could. Vivian had become an addiction, a risk I couldn't seem to stop taking. And part of me knew that the worst was yet to come. I spent the next few days trapped in my own mind, weighed down by guilt, fear, and something darker I couldn't quite shake. I tried to focus on my cases, on the piles of paperwork waiting on my desk, but Vivian's words, her touch, haunted me. I kept replaying our last conversation, her face as she begged me to believe her, the way her eyes softened, just for a moment as if she actually needed me. But how could I trust her? She'd kept the most fundamental thing about herself hidden from me. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't stop myself from wanting her, from wanting the thrill, the escape, the version of myself that only seemed to exist when I was with her. It was like being addicted to something I knew was toxic but couldn't resist. Ethan's case continued, drawing me deeper into the tangled mess of their marriage. He came to my office almost daily, his frustration with his wife growing more intense with each meeting. He'd give me details of her schedule, places she frequented, times when he was certain she was meeting someone else. It was all I could do to keep my face blank, my expression neutral as he described her suspected infidelity. The worst part was knowing that he wasn't wrong. He just didn't know that the man she was seeing was sitting right across from him. One morning, as he sat across my desk, his eyes narrowed and suspicious, he said, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Have you found anything yet?" he asked, his voice calm but his gaze intense. "Any signs of who it might be?" I swallowed hard, keeping my tone steady. "Not yet, but we're following leads. I'm confident we'll have something concrete soon." He leaned back, a cold smile flickering across his face. "Good. I want him to pay for what he's done, Alex. Whoever this man is, I want to ruin him completely." I forced myself to nod, keeping my hands steady as I jotted down notes that meant nothing. "Understood. I'll keep you updated." Ethan stood, adjusting his suit, his expression dark. "You're a good man, Alex. I trust you'll do the right thing." He looked at me, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. After all, I hired you because you're the best. And I don't like to lose. After he left, I sat in my chair, staring blankly at the door. The irony was unbearable. Here I was, hired to protect him from the very betrayal I was committing. Each time he praised my professionalism, my loyalty, the weight of my guilt grew heavier, sinking like stones in my gut. That night, I was supposed to meet Vivian. She'd sent me a message in the early afternoon, suggesting a quiet place in the village where we could talk without being interrupted. But as the day dragged on, my unease only deepened. I knew that seeing her again would pull me further into this mess, yet I couldn't resist. I needed to see her, to feel her touch, if only to remind myself why I was risking everything. I arrived at the bar just before 8, slipping into a secluded booth in the back. A few minutes later, she walked in, her dark hair framing her face, her expression unreadable as she scanned the room. When her gaze landed on me, she smiled, that familiar, captivating smile that had drawn me in from the start. "Hey," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." I forced a smile, though my mind was still racing. Neither was I. She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, soft, and for a moment, all my doubts faded, replaced by a warmth I couldn't deny. But then I remembered Ethan's words, the way he'd looked at me, trusting me, and the guilt flooded back. "Vivian, it's too dangerous," I said, pulling my hand away. "Your husband is convinced. You're seeing someone, and he's determined to find out who." She sighed, glancing down. "I know, but he's been controlling every part of my life for years. Alex, what we have, it's the only thing that feels real to me. I can't give it up." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something. "Vivian, if he finds out about us, it could ruin both of us. He told me himself he wants to destroy the man you're seeing. And I don't think he's bluffing." She looked up, her expression softened by sadness, maybe even regret. "Alex, I never wanted you to get involved like this, but I can't walk away from you. You've become important to me." Her words cut through my defenses, and before I could stop myself, I reached across the table, letting my hand linger on hers. But even as I held her gaze, a thought nagged at the back of my mind. Was this all worth it? "Maybe we could figure something out," she murmured, her fingers lacing through mine. "If we're careful. Maybe he'll never know." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Ethan's name flash on the screen. I stared at the phone, debating whether to answer, but curiosity and fear got the better of me. I picked it up, signaling for Vivian to stay quiet. "Hello, Alex, it's Ethan." His voice was sharp, urgent. "I need you to meet me. There's something I want you to see." I felt my stomach twist, every nerve on high alert. "Now? It's late. This can't wait," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's about my wife. Have proof, solid proof this time. I want you there when I confront her." My blood ran cold. Proof? What did he know? Was this some kind of trap? "All right," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Where should I meet you?" He gave me the address of a penthouse apartment, one of his properties, and told me to be there within the hour. The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a sense of dread so deep it felt like a weight pressing on my chest. Vivian looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "What is it?" I took a shaky breath, meeting her gaze. "Ethan wants me to meet him. He says he has proof about your affair." Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that this was spiraling out of control faster than I could keep up. Ethan was closing in, and if he really had proof, there would be no way to cover this up. "I'll go," I said finally, standing up. "I'll try to talk him down, see if I can find out what he knows." Vivian reached out, grabbing my arm, her grip tight. "Alex, please, be careful." I gave her a nod, my mind already racing with possibilities. As I left the bar and stepped into the night, a single thought echoed in my mind. This was a game I could no longer control, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The elevator ride to Ethan's penthouse felt like a descent into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I rehearsed what I would say, how I would handle this. But the truth was I had no idea what Ethan knew or how much he'd pieced together. My mind flashed back to Vivian, to the look of fear in her eyes as I'd left her in the bar. It had been the first time I'd seen her vulnerable, truly scared. And now here I was, walking straight into the lion's den to protect her and maybe to protect myself. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the dimly lit hallway. At the end of it, Ethan's door was slightly ajar, a strip of light spilling out onto the marble floor. I swallowed hard, steeling myself as I pushed the door open and walked inside. Ethan was waiting in the center of the room, his back turned to me as he looked out over the glittering city skyline. He didn't turn around when I entered, just raised a glass of whiskey to his lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. "Close the door behind you, Alex," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. I shut the door, feeling the weight of the room settle around me. "You said you had something to show me," I managed, keeping my tone neutral, though my pulse was racing. He turned then, his face unreadable, his eyes sharper and colder than I'd ever seen them. He motioned to the coffee table beside him, where a small stack of photographs lay, face down. "Go ahead," he said, a hint of challenge in his voice. "Take a look." I approached the table slowly, my hands shaking as I reached for the photos. I flipped the top one over and felt the ground drop out from under me. The first photograph was of me and Vivian in the corner booth of the bar where we'd had one of our first secret meetings. She was leaning in close, her hand on mine, both of us, oblivious to the world around us. The next photo showed us outside the bar, in the glow of the streetlights, locked in a kiss. Each photo was sharper than the last, capturing moments of intimacy, of betrayal. There was no mistaking who we were or what was happening between us. I felt a wave of nausea rise up, and I forced myself to set the photos down, my mind scrambling for any way out, any way to salvage this. But the evidence was damning. Ethan knew everything. "Ethan," I started, but he held up a hand, silencing me. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't insult me by trying to deny it." I swallowed, my throat dry. I didn't know she was your wife when we met. I swear, if I had known, I never would have." "Oh, I believe you," he cut me off, his voice dripping with contempt. "I believe that you were just a pawn in her game. But that doesn't make you any less guilty, does it?" He took another step toward me, his face twisted in anger, a look of cold fury that sent a chill down my spine. "You're my attorney, Alex. You were supposed to protect me, to help me. And instead, you're the man she was sleeping with behind my back. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" "Ethan, please, let me explain. It got out of hand. I didn't mean for this to happen," I stammered, desperate to find some way to diffuse the situation. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Of course you didn't mean for it to happen. Men like you never mean for things like this to happen, do you? You think you're above consequences, that you can just play with people's lives and walk away unscathed." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, and held it up to my face. On the screen, there was a video, grainy, taken from a distance but unmistakable. It showed me and Vivian in her apartment, her hands on my shoulders, our faces inches apart. It was the night we'd first slept together. My blood ran cold as I realized the depth of Ethan's surveillance, the extent to which he'd been watching us. There was no escape from this. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his tone deadly calm. "You're going to resign from the case. Quietly, you're going to hand over any evidence you have of Vivian's infidelity. and you're going to disappear from our lives. Because if you don't, he let the threat hang in the air, his eyes blazing with fury. I will make sure every single person in this city knows exactly what you did. I was trapped, cornered. Ethan held all the power now, and he knew it. Fine, I managed, barely able to keep my voice steady. I'll step away. I'll give you what you need. His mouth twisted into a bitter smile. Good. I thought you'd see reason. He turned his back to me, dismissing me, and for a moment I just stood there, feeling hollow, empty. Everything I'd worked for, my career, my reputation, my pride was crumbling. All because of a woman I should have stayed away from. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the penthouse. As I rode the elevator down, my mind was spinning. I'd lost everything: Vivian, my career, my dignity, and there was no one to blame but myself. In the days that followed, I did exactly as he'd instructed. I sent him my resignation, withdrew from the case, and handed over every piece of information he needed to secure his divorce. I knew that he would use it to destroy her, and that knowledge left me feeling sick. But there was nothing left for me to do. Vivian had taken everything and left me to deal with the ruins. As for her, she disappeared. I never saw her again, never heard from her. Maybe she'd left the city, or maybe Ethan had made sure she'd stay silent. Either way, she was gone, a ghost in my life, leaving behind only the wreckage we'd caused. Looking back, I know I should have walked away from the start, but Vivian was like a drug, thrill I couldn't resist, and in chasing that thrill, I'd lost everything.